This conference will now be
She
recorded.
is also associated with a Grant Thornton PwC and currently with the Versari Advisors. The discussion also joined by CA Pranav Kapadia. Here I also honored to introduce him as CA Pranav Kapadia, qualified as a chartered accountant. He is a partner indirect tax at APMH and Associate LLP. CA Pranav Kapadia expertise lies in advisory, audit, compliance, service, indirect tax, government. He is president of a GST Practitioner Associate of Maharashtra for 2017-18. He is member of the Indirect Tax Committee WRC of the ICAI for 2019-20. He has addressed various lectures on GST, MVET, CST at seminar organized by professional bodies such as GSTPM, Chamber of Tax Consultant WRC, and various industrial trade associations. He has also bagged various awards such as Best Group Leader, Best Article Writer, Best Leader of Mock Tribunal, etc. He has represented on several issues in GST before the Honorable Finance Minister of India, member of GST Council and GST Commissioner, etc. He has been contributed regularly to GSTPM and WSC references, GST review, Celtex review, books on study material for VAT laws in Maharashtra for beginner. He has written short publication on impact of changes in GST law on real estate sector. He is also a co-author of the Guide on Maharashtra Settlement of Arrear of Tax, Interest Penalty or Late Fees Ordinance 2019, published by WSC. Now CA Maitri Mehta will take over the today's 16th session. CA Maitri Mehta. Maitri Ben.
Hello. Yeah.
Yeah.
Audible?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So, good evening, all present here for this webinar. Towards completion of 3 years of India, which has opened up, evaluate, deliberate, and understand. Yeah.
Can you start your webcam also, if it is possible?
Yes. Just.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fine.
Yes. So this opened up the doors to evaluate, deliberate, and discuss various aspects of this law, which are being continuously decoded, advanced rulings, and the High Court judgments. In this session, myself, and Kapar you through the rulings under the Advanced Ruling Authority and the High Court for this session today. Next. So our discussion today will be in 3 parts. Number 1, advanced rulings on 3 topics: reverse charge mechanism, intermediary services or export, and ITC. Next will be the High Court rulings. And lastly, as an auditor, what are the key areas which we need to be mindful about? So Section 97 of the CGST Act prescribes prescribes the matters in which the advance rulings can be sought by the authorities. Chapter 14 of the CGST Act prescribes the advance ruling chapter. What are the areas in which the advance ruling can be sought? Number 1, classification of any goods or services, applicability of any notification issued under the applicable to this act, admissibility of the liability paid on any goods or services, applicability of registration. Example, a charitable institution is contemplating whether to take registration under GST Act or not. It is undertaking its charitable activities as well as it is undertaking some sale of spiritual products during the course of its advancement charitable activity. So they can with the proposition whether to get registered under this act or not. And lastly, any particular transaction which you undertake for any goods or services, whether it is resulting in supply or not. So these are 6 parameters on which you can raise a request before the advance ruling authority to get the to get your questions resolved. It is notable that advance ruling authority is not giving any answer with respect to any place of supply determination under the Act. Next. So first advance ruling which we are going to cover is the reverse charge liability on director's salary. Rajasthan Advance Ruling Authority, in case of Claycraft India Private Limited, has provided their ruling on 20th of February 2020. So the facts of the case and the question before the authority stands as follows. So it was a private limited company with 6 directors working in different managerial positions. All the directors were drawing salary and were subject to various statutory deductions such as TDS, Provident Fund, etc. for the remuneration drawn in the form of salary. Apart from salary, they were also getting commission income. On the commission income, the company used to discharge RCM liability on the commission portion rendered to the directors. So the question which they posed before the advance ruling authorities was whether this salary would be a consideration falling under Schedule 3 of the CGST Act, stating that it's a service between an employer and employee in the course of employment and hence not subject to GST, or will it be chargeable as a service provided by a director to its company under RCM? So this was the question before the authorities. Lastly, the authorities went on through their MOA. They elaborated the discussion with respect to what is meant to be employment, so on and so forth. What was the ruling provided by them? Let us discuss that. So the authority went on to say that directors are not in the capacity of employer-employee relationship with the company. The directors are performing their activities basis and drawing the remuneration from the company. So remuneration may be given a nomenclature which could be anything. So a salary is just a form of nomenclature given to the service provision made by the director to the company. And when there is a distinct entry in the notification for reverse charge mechanism for these type of services provided by the directors to the company, such services shall be liable to RCM. So this was the ruling pronounced by the authority. Now the question arises is, company's directors had disclosed this income as a salary in their personal income tax return. Secondly, the company was so long and so forth in the service tax regime and continuing a year after were deducting TDS under section 192, as well as they were complying with the EPF laws with respect to the provident fund matters. So what about that? So this is the question which we all must ask ourselves. So what about the treatment to be given in line with the other laws? So for this, we may also refer what was there in the service tax regime. In service tax regime, there was notification 30 by 2012, which prescribed the list of the services liable to reverse charge. In that, the same entry which is there in the GST regime lies in the service tax regime. There is no change per se in the entry specified. Secondly, there was a MCA circular in 2012 which specifically provided that any commission rendered to non-whole-time directors would be subject to service tax. Also, there was a circular, CBC circular in around 2009, just prior to the negative list regime, in which the CBC had clarified that if a managing director is drawing an amount with respect to managing the day-to-day affairs of the company, the consideration drawn by them shall not be regarded as management consultancy services provided to the company. Instead, no service tax shall be charged on that. Only in case of non-executive or non-whole-time directors who provide some advisory function or fee will be liable to service tax. Giving this background in our earlier pre-GST tax regimes, it appears to us that the intent earlier with the department as well as the industry was flowing in the manner that only commission or certain advisory fee, not in the regular capacity or day-to-day capacity of the director provided to the company, would fall under the category of services provided by the director to the body corporate liable to RCM. However, this judgment has brought about a controversial pattern stating that the services in respect to day-to-day activities will not be covered under the employment contract clause, instead under RCM. So, yeah, this was the background and the ruling. This is the detailed judgment which we stated, that stating that it will be liable to RCM. However, just this Monday, Karnataka Advanced Ruling Authority has favored in the favor of the assessee, stating that any executive director is drawing salary from the company, then such salary shall be covered under Schedule 3 of the CGST Act, that is services in the course of employment, and not subject to GST. This judgment is sort of a relief provided with respect to the controversy created by this Rajasthan AR judgment. So that judgment of Karnataka is here as. So this was a assessee Anil Kumar Agrawal who had asked for the question before the authority whether he should get himself registered or not, and he had submitted a list of various incomes earned by him. The incomes included salary from partnership firm, salary from the private limited company, interest income from loans and advances granted to various persons, rental on residential and commercial properties, capital gains and loss on the sale of shares, and the maturity proceeds from the life insurance policies. He wanted to understand that which of these incomes will be considered under the term aggregate turnover under GST, and he would be required to ascertain the threshold limit and obtain the GST number or not. So in this ruling, though there was no much elaboration as to why the salary should be considered as a service employment and not, or what was the definition of the executive director and non-executive director, it was a straightforward judgment provided by Karnataka authority. So I have highlighted that portion in our PPT. Executive director who is drawing salary, they have mentioned it covered under employer-employee relationship. And if it is a non-executive director, remuneration subjected to RCM. Other aspects you may go through it, which were interest income, rentals, dividends, and so on and so forth. So this was the highlight or a relief for any notices which may come up just primarily relying on the Rajasthan AR's judgment on reverse charge applicable to the director's salary. I will pause for a minute so that you all can go through this, and Pranav, I will also speak.
Hello everyone, good evening to all of you. First of all, compliments to the conveners of Ghatkopar Study Circle for a continuous e-learning series. I think this is the 16th session, and it really takes lots of hard works and efforts to organize all this and enrich all the participants' knowledge of all the participants. So I think a big compliment to Charvik, Yogesh Bhai, and the entire team, Bhavin Mehta, all those who are involved in organizing this e-learning series of Ghatkopar Study Circle, and thanks for inviting me to share my views with all our own members of Ghatkopar Study Circle. It's always a pleasure to be amongst your own members, and I really like to be one amongst you. Well, as far as today's topic is concerned, regarding discussion on the latest rulings and especially on this AARs, advanced authority rulings, or should this be adverse authority rulings? So that's always a dilemma, that whether these are advanced authority rulings or adverse authority rulings. But yeah, we need to first understand the general principles that whenever any advanced authority ruling is applied by an applicant, that ruling is applicable to that particular applicant only. To other applicants, it only has a persuasive value and it is not applicable directly. So any person who has not applied for that particular advanced authority ruling may or may not take cognizance of the ruling issued. Yeah, but of course, these rulings do help us in understanding the mindset of the departmental authorities, because all these advanced authority rulings are delivered by the departmental officers. There is no there is no judiciary involved in this process, and these are the revenue officers of the state department, one from the state department, one from the central side, and both of them come together to give these rulings. Even the appellate authorities are the commissioners from the state GST and the central GST. So generally it has been observed that all these advanced rulings are revenue prone, but yes, it does gives us the mindset of the taxing authorities, that what stand the department would be taking, say in case if there's an assessment which comes up after 2-3 years, and a certain decision has been taken today, so what would be their stand. Nevertheless, we need to just understand and keep in mind the persuasive value of this advanced rulings, and take our decisions accordingly. Coming to the topic proper of reverse charge liability on director salary, yes, RCM on director sitting fees was there under the service tax regime also. RCM liability on payments to directors is also envisaged under the GST law, but we really need to understand on what quantum of the amount paid to directors should be liable to reverse charge. Maitri has very aptly and nicely put up both these advanced authority rulings. The earlier ruling from Claycraft, which was issued by Rajasthan AR authority, mentioned or has ruled that salaries paid to directors are liable to reverse charge mechanism. But the very recent ruling of Anil Kumar Agrawal, which has been issued on 4th of May 2020, amidst this corona crisis timing, well, in this ruling, this is a very apt and a very proper ruling, we can say, which has clearly identified the nature of the activities which are carried on by the directors. Well, we all know that in every company there could be different kinds of directors. There could be an executive director as well as there could be a non-executive director. The directors we generally understand, say in case of private limited companies where we generally cater to, are the directors who get remuneration from the company, and they generally are termed as executive directors of the company. Well, the question is that whether the executive director of the company, does he qualify under entry number 6 of notification number 13 by 2017 as liable to reverse charge mechanism, that whatever payment is made to director is liable to reverse charge mechanism, or does the schedule entry number 1 of schedule 3 of the CGST Act prevail, which says that if there is an employer-employee relationship between the person providing the services, then such services will neither be treated as a supply of goods nor a supply of services. So the main criteria we need to understand is that the director who is getting the remuneration from the company, whether he is an employee of the company and whether and if being an employee of the company would Schedule 3 prevail or the notification prevail. Well, the exemption Schedule 3 is covered by Section 7, and Section 7 is relating to what is a supply, and Section 7(2) categorically carves out the activities or transactions which shall be treated neither as supply of goods nor supply of services. And if the activity by the director for which he is getting paid is covered by that entry, then it cannot be deemed to be a supply at all. Once it is not a supply under the GST law, there is no question of any forward charge nor any reverse charge liability on the director's salary. So I think that things are aptly clear that in case of salaries paid to directors, there should be no liability under reverse charge mechanism. Yes, then in the case of other non-executive directors, in many companies, in many listed companies, in many big companies, there are directors who are not employees of the director, but they could be professional directors, independent directors who are non-executive directors. They just attend the board meetings and they get the sitting fees for that. Well, yes, those are the areas where the sitting fees are paid to the directors. Those are the categories of supplies which are liable to tax, and reverse charge mechanism will apply on such director sitting fees paid by the company, and and uh, and in such cases generally salary is not paid to directors, they are paid the sitting fees, and only such cases will be liable to RCM. And I feel this Anil Kumar Agrawal AR has very aptly put up, although the reasoning has not been very clearly given in the AR, but I think the reason is Schedule 3, that employer-employee relationship persists in the case of executive directors. Well, should we take up any questions, or will we have any time for questions, or we can take up at the end? Charvik, I think we should take up at end. Charvik?
Yes, sir. We should take the questions at the end.
Yeah, because I think there are various, I think 7 or 8 different categories of transactions which are analyzed by Maitri, and I think let's proceed with that.
Yeah,
What do you
participants can put the questions in the chat. I will WhatsApp to Maitri, and then afterwards you and Maitri can solve the questions.
Okay.
Please continue. Yes.
Yeah. So moving on to the next topic, which is on intermediary services or export. So the term intermediary services pre-existed in the pre-GST regime as well as in the GST regime. There is no much difference in the term. So what do you mean by intermediary services? Intermediary services means any services provided by any person in order to facilitate or arrange the supply of goods or services between two or more persons, however, does not include the provision of such services on its own account. So this is the definition of intermediary services provided in our IGST law. The intermediary who is an intermediary, generally the person facilitating the service between two or more persons and receiving remuneration in the form of commission or a fee. So such persons having the setup in such a manner, the place of supply provisions stipulate their place of provision to be in the location where the supplier of such intermediary services provided. That's why there are many applicants approaching the advanced ruling authorities to decipher whether their activities shall be constituted as intermediary services and the place of supply falling thereby in India, or it shall be regarded as an export and hence eligible to export incentive and benefits. So this is the background under which we will proceed with the authorities assessment. The niche area which we are going to cover in this activity is pre-sales or the marketing support services. So the applicants have approached the authorities on various issues, that is IT enabled services, back office support services, pre-sales or marketing support services, whether they constitute as an intermediary service or export, we are going to cover the pre-sale or the marketing support services. Before we go into the detailed discussion of the available advanced rulings, I would like to point out that there is a thin line of difference between marketing support services provided and the facilitation of service between two or more persons. So, because of this thin distinction between the two activities, there has been a controversy recorded amongst various authorities giving different judgments on this topic, some saying it as an intermediary while others continuing to say it as an export. The first case we are going to take is Infinera India Private Limited. It's a appellate authority for advanced rulings judgment provided by Karnataka authorities. So the facts of the case are as under. It was a 100% EOU under STPI scheme and a subsidiary company of Infinera Corporation USA. It was involved in development of software products in relation to the products developed by the US entity. Also, it had entered into a pre-sale and a marketing support services agreement with its foreign entity. What did that marketing support service actually include in the scope of work? It included assisting in coordination and promotion of sales and advertising its products in India. Second, to conduct a market research and provide a report with respect to matters which concern to the Indian business or the Indian market. Lastly, provide information or education or service programs in India as directed by the US entity. This was the scope of work designed in their pre-sales and marketing support service agreement. So the authority went out to the advanced ruling authority ruled it as an intermediary services. Aggrieved by their decision, the SSE went out to the appellate authority for a judgment. So this is that judgment which we are discussing right now. What were the grounds of appeal by the appellant, stating that why our services should be not considered as an intermediary? Number one, they were stating that there was no authority to them to conclude or negotiate the contracts on behalf of the US entity. The marketing support services were just auxiliary services and in no point were to conclude the contracts on behalf of the US entity. Second, there was no linkage of remuneration to the price of the contracts concluded by the USA entity. In fact, the customer and US entity directly coordinated with each other and the goods were dispatched from the overseas to the customer's location directly. Third, they stated that we have a principal to principal relationship with our US entity and not the agent relationship. Also, the compensation decided between the both distinct persons was at cost plus 15% markup for this activity, and it is not working in the capacity of an agent or broker. All these contentions were put forward. Also, they stated that the requirement analysis, request for proposal, supply of goods, installation, post-supply, inspection, etc. All the activities were carried out by the US entity only, with no role involved of them. After looking at these contentions, the authority had requested for a bilateral advance pricing agreement to be submitted, and also it went out to break up the definition of intermediary services under the IGST law and seek to apply it in the assessee's case. So after going through the bilateral advance pricing agreement, they found out that the US entity conceptualized the product in US. Thereafter, they developed a marketing related material in their entity, in their location, and distributed globally to all the entities, including the Indian counterpart. Thereafter, what was the Indian company's role? It was to give a presentation to the US and presentation of the products developed by the US entity to the potential customers and evaluate and know what the feedback they give. After obtaining the feedback from the customers, they used to provide the feedback or for improvements and enhancements to the US entity. All the this was the marketing related support provided by them, that is promoting or to the prospective clients about the products and the services offered. This was the role. Thereafter, any negotiation of the contract or deal closure, everything was done by the US entity with the customer. They merely act as a medium only with respect to this specific niche activity. So the authority read through this advanced pricing agreements clauses. Next, they went out to break out the definition of intermediary, which states a person who facilitates or arranges the supply of goods between two or more persons. So the facilitate word, they have defined it or meant to be a person to make something easier or to help, and arrange means to bring about a understanding or to make presentation to make certain things in certain manner. This was the definition derived, and what they applied it in the appellant's case is that you are acting as a facilitator in meeting by way of meeting the prospective customers in India, giving the demonstration of your products and obtaining the feedback and passing it to the US entity. This activity can be regarded as a licensing activity conducted by you on behalf of the US entity. You are the person who is acting as a medium or a link between the customer and the US entity, thereby regarding them as an intermediary. They negated the reliance placed by the applicant in case of GoDaddy services case in service tax, as well as favorable Maharashtra advance ruling case in case of Asai Kasei Private Limited. So this way they regarded them to be an intermediary. Next is the similar cases wherein the authorities have went out to differentiate whether it's an intermediary service or export. In case of McAfee Software India Private Limited, they have regarded the marketing, sale, and distribution of products, services on behalf of the Singapore entity to be considered as a marketing services intermediary services provided in India. In case of Mayank Jain, AR Maharashtra, it was a very different or a unique set of service provided by this individual. He was acting in two capacities. That is, number one, he used to do a research and provide a marketing and intelligence support to the consultant manager sitting in USA to enable him to receive the investment from prospective customers. So the customers or the investors in India willing to invest in projects in USA in EB5 program, this individual was acting as a medium or a link between that consultant manager and the investor located in India. And once the deal is finalized between the investor and the investee, this individual used to get a remuneration in the form of commission linked to the deal strike through. And secondly, after the deal is being finalized, this person used to provide hand-holding services, that is filling out forms, addressing the queries, etc. activities for the investor located in India. This person, after approaching the authority, went out and was regarded as an intermediary on behalf of the consultant manager located in USA. So these were the authority rulings which stated that the persons acting as a link between the customer and the other entity for regarding as a facilitator of goods or services between two or more persons shall be an intermediary under this law. Thereby, the activity cannot be regarded as an export, and the taxability shall be determined in India. We do have a contrary ruling in case of Asai Kasei India Private Limited, which is favorable for the applicant, stating that you are an independent contractor working for an entity located outside India, and hence the activities provided by you shall not be regarded as an intermediary. Instead, it shall be market research services and accounting and technical services provided by you from India to a person located outside India, regarding them as export. So all in all, to summarize, I would say that there are judgments which state a particular activity to be intermediary while there are judgments which state that these services are exports. Well, the true determination of your activity shall firstly depend on the terms and conditions of the contract, secondly, on the actual activities performed by you all, and lastly, on the remuneration and other aspects covered by you. So it's a very controversial topic to state that this service shall be in intermediary or this service shall surely be an export. Hence, this topic is having a no straitjacket formula to classify anything. We need to consider the terms and of the agreement or contract to understand the taxability. And yes, there are diverse views from various ARs and the service tax judicial precedents. As a consultant, we need to be mindful of the activity undertaken by our client and assess the taxability accordingly. Over to you, Pranav sir.
Yes, Maitri, I think what you said is perfectly right. There is no straitjacket formula for classifying such services, whether they are intermediary services or whether they are not an intermediary services. The line of demarcation is very thin. Already we have had maybe more than 10 to 12 different ARs on this topic, and each one of them has a unique feature. The services provided also differ from person to person, case to case, and the facts of each case need to be analyzed at every point of time. I think the only thing that we need to, which I need to add to what already Maitri has told, what I understand from the definition of intermediary is that in the case of intermediary services, if the services are provided on principal to principal basis between the the person who is outside India and the person who is providing the service. So in case if there are only two persons covered, maybe uh, there the intermediary clause will not get hit, because it essentially says that services are provided by way of arranging or facilitation, and they are provided to a person who receives the service. So there's the recipient of service, there's a provider of service who is, say, the intermediary, and there's a principal who is located outside India. So there are generally three parties involved in such a case, and that is where we need to first analyze and try to distinguish that whether the services are being provided to the principal itself or they are being provided as a facility, so that the services of the principal or to be provided by the principal or the goods to be delivered on behalf of the principal are being delivered to some other person. So I think that is one delineating factor that we need to keep in mind, apart from all other points which Maitri has already explained. And there are divergent views, but the fundamental is that uh, this intermediary services, if they are on principal to principal basis and only to a person who is outside India, then maybe there is a fair chance that intermediary services might not trigger. There has to be a third person also. Of course, we all know that even in the service tax regime, this concept of intermediary was introduced. Earlier, it was only on services, and then goods were also covered. So, if any commission is received on any goods which are sold by a person outside India to any other person, maybe within India or outside India, and the commission is earned in India, that was the point of time that when this provision was triggered, and there the liability does arise in those cases. We have favorable judgments also, as mentioned by Maitri. Asai Kasai judgment and the GoDaddy judgment, they are favorable judgments. Of course, there are judgments or other these rulings which are against the SSE also. But again, there is no straitjacket formula. Each case needs to be analyzed with the respective documentation before determining the correct liability to tax, that whether it's liable
Yes.
to tax or whether it's an export of service.
Yeah.
Yeah, Maitri.
Agree. Yeah. So now moving on to our next topic, which is input tax credit. So admissibility of input tax credits is also a point of discussion which many assessees have, especially in case of any activity which they feel results in any construction to an immovable property. We are going to cover three cases in this scenario. First case we are going to cover is in case of WeWork India Management Private Limited. It's a Karnataka Advanced Ruling Authority's judgment. The facts of the case stand as under. The applicant is a person who lets out its properties on rent to various tenants for as office spaces. It had asked for admissibility of credit on two aspects. Number one, oak top wooden flooring, and second, for detachable sliding glass partitions. It had classified both of these items as furniture and fixtures in its books of accounts. It wanted to understand whether their classification and availability and eligibility of credit determined by them is correct or not. So the ruling pronounced by the authority stands like this. They've explained that both these items were movable in nature, hence classified by them under furniture and fixtures. Secondly, the term construction is limited to additions, alterations, or any activity performed on to the extent capitalized to the immovable property. Their contention placed was that these activities or these goods or services were never capitalized to the immovable property by them, so they should be eligible to avail the credit. The authority, after going through the nature of the items and the law available at date, went ahead to state that the ITC shall be available to them on the oak top wooden flooring, for which they had reasoned it very detailedly, stating that other wooden flooring was detachable and reusable. It was not any addition or alteration made to the existing constructed immovable property. Rather, it was just a floor up to the existing constructed property. It can be replaced without affecting the actual office space which was given to them. And lastly, that no permanence was involved in fastening, nor any damage was done by them to the property while putting the flooring. Hence, it will not be covered under addition or alteration to the immovable property, hence not covered under the definition of construction to the extent capitalized to the immovable property, hence the credit shall be allowed. Second, for partitions, that is glass partitions, which they had asked for, the authority went ahead to state that these partitions which they are trying to make is demarcating the entire property to be given out to various tenants. These partitions basically are to fix blocks assigned to each of the tenants, giving a separate space like thing or a wall, separate wall to each of the tenants. This was envisaged in the initial phase of the immovable property letting out and cannot be reshifted or reshuffled every now and then. It's permanently fastened to the building, and the building itself is an immovable property. Hence, this is termed as an alteration or an addition made to the immovable property, covering them in the definition of section 17(5)(d), and hence terming it as an ineligible input tax credit. The court also made, in fact, the authority had gone to the, in fact, the applicant had gone to the authority with a CA certificate stating that these activities, these items are movable in nature and we should be given a credit. So it's important to understand that merit nomenclature tagging to certain assets, that these are not immovable and these are just movable on a CA certification basis or any understanding will not change or alter the category as an immovable property. Merely if you don't capitalize it as immovable property or classify it as immovable property in your books cannot change the true nature of that services, and hence it shall it shall be prudent to understand that if mere change in the nomenclature will not change its true nature, and hence the credit shall be denied if it's an immovable property. So this was the judgment given in case of WeWork. Next, we go to the judgment in case of Embassy Private Limited, again provided by Karnataka Advanced Ruling Authority, in which the applicant told that they have availed various works contract services such as lighting, firefighting systems, etc., in relation to a warehouse construction. And they have classified it as a plant and machinery in their books of accounts. They told that these are the works contract services used in relation to further provision of services of letting out of the property, and hence it's not a credit relating to construction of the immovable property for own use, and hence the credit should be allowed. This was the contention put forth. The authority went ahead to say that ITC is inadmissible because merit declaration of assets in different class will not change the nature. And lastly, the letting out shall be of the property itself per se, and not of the individual items like electrical works or firefighting separately. The rent shall be recovered for the letting out of the space and not for the separate items. And as these items also do not have independent existence without the immovable property, hence the credit was denied to them. In the backdrop of these advanced rulings, we do have a favorable High Court judgment in case of Odisha, a High Court in case of Safari Retreats, which states that the credit shall be available to the assessee in case of letting out of the shopping malls to the tenants or lessees. So the brief facts will be have been stated here that they had a ITC accumulated of 34 crores in relation to construction of the immovable property, that is the shopping mall, and after construction of this mall it was given to the tenants for letting out and earning rental incomes out of that. Department denied the credit on account of the restriction placed under section 17(5)(d) of the CGST Act. The petitioner went out with a writ petition stating that the restriction placed in the Act under this section will not be applicable to them, and secondly, it should be held as ultra vires the CGST Act. So the ruling has been given as under the contention was the very purpose of introducing GST is to make a uniform provision for a very purpose of introducing GST was to remove the cascading effect and reduce the multiplicity of the taxes. And there was a rental receipt earned because of the construction of the mall, and now that accumulated ITC should be available in against the output liability on account of the rental. There was a no break in the tax chain, and hence the credit should be granted to them. If there was a sale of land, then there is a break in the tax chain, and very well the authorities can restrict the credit. But restriction of credit in case of letting out of business should not be made by the authorities. This was the contention put forth before the authority, the High Court, and the High Court ruled it in favor of the assessee, stating that GST was a uniform tax for reducing the multiplicity and the cascading effect of the taxation, and the petitioner is retaining the property and not using for its own purpose. Hence, the stringent restrictive provision shall not be applicable to the case of the petitioner. However, the court has refrained from declaring the provision ultra vires. So this was a very favorable ruling provided with respect to admissibility of ITC on construction of property further let out. For more light will be highlighted by Pranav sir on this.
Yeah. Well, Section 17(5) C and D of the CGST Act are very much similar to the provisions of the Maharashtra Value Added Tax Act rules 54 GNH. And those who are already here in Maharashtra and practicing and have been practicing under VAT have faced such kinds of issues. Though there is a bit of a difference in the sense that plant and machinery, construction, alteration. What do you mean by construction? Whether alteration, renovation, etc., whether that will be covered or not. Those are the additional points which are given under the GST law. Plus, the Act also mentions that to the extent it is capitalized, uh, the restriction of ITC would be levied or would be made applicable to the extent the goods are capitalized. Hence, this controversy, what we see is mainly evolving around whether the impugned goods which have been purchased are immovable property, are such that which are getting converted into an immovable property, or they do not remain an immovable property. I think if we go through the crux of all these judgments, everywhere it is being analyzed at whether these are immovable property or this is not an immovable property. The first case, which was of WeWork, there I think there were two questions. One was regarding the flooring, and other was regarding the partitions, the glass partitions. The argument for flooring was that already there was one layer of flooring which was there, and the wooden flooring which was placed was in addition to the main flooring which was already there on the floor, and hence it was not getting converted into an immovable property. The immovable property was already there, and something additional was put on the immovable property. As far as the and the input tax credit of that wooden flooring was allowed. As far as the partitions are concerned, the argument was that these are glass partitions. These are movable glass partitions. WeWork is a company which gives its office spaces on rent, and hence the demarcation of the area of a particular tenant is based on those glass partitions. But the authority ruled by saying that this is a part of construction that these glasses have been used, and they have considered these glass partitions as immovable property. Although the contention of the applicant was that these glass partitions can be dismantled and they can be moved and they can be taken to a different place, or maybe the size of the unit can also be variated. Well, I think there is an issue in this, because this ruling considers the glass partition that they are used for construction of immovable property, because they have taken that into consideration. They have tried to distinguish the words for construction of immovable property and not in relation to immovable property. And in spite of that argument which was taken up by the applicant in that ruling, that these glass partitions are not for constructing the immovable property. The immovable property has already been constructed, and the partitions are being placed just to demarcate the areas. But this argument was not accepted by the department, and they have disallowed it. Yeah, we need to be cautious on the stand of the department. Maybe this can be still further challenged, that if these glass partitions are movable, detachable, then yes, they are not forming part of the immovable property. But there could be other cases where the glass partitions are fixed and so fastened to the place that they are not detachable, or it might be with great difficulty that they could be removed. So it's always going to be a debatable point that whether this glass partitions input tax credit would be allowed or would not be allowed. If they are purely easily removable glasses, then yes, input tax credit may be taken. But in case if it is of a permanent nature, there will be an issue in claiming the input tax credit for such glass partitions. As regards the other judgment of Embassy Industrial Park and this Safari, I think Safari Retreats was a judgment which was a favorable judgment which has been given by the Orissa High Court, and that was a case of a mall, and they had claimed credits on the input tax credit of the various goods and services used in constructing that mall, and they said the entire purpose of GST was seamless credit, and hence if the mall is given on rent, the input tax credit in creating that immovable property, although it is for own self-use, the property, if it is for own self-use, section 17(5)(d) says that credit won't be available. But the argument put forth by the applicant was that it is for furtherance of business. This argument was in fact listened to by the judge in Safari Retreats in Orissa, and the judge possibly went on the concept of GST law, the seamless credit, the passing on of credit, and he went on further to mention that in case the credit is not granted to that mall owner, it frustrates the very purpose of seamless credit under GST. But there was no hardline argument or justification that how to overcome the rigors of section 16, which says that it will be subject to certain conditions. Section 17 is there, which specifically blocks the credit which are eligible, because first the credit has to be availed or become eligible, and then if it is a block credit, it becomes ineligible. So there was no such deliberation on all these aspects, but it was a ruling which went on the basic fundamentals of the law, which went on to say that if there are such stringent provisions, then the purpose of the law is vitiated. I don't know how far this judgment will stand in the courts of law, because we need to see what happens to other cases. I believe this judgment has reached the Supreme Court, and we should really wait before actually taking cue from this judgment of what is going to be the fate of this judgment. In the meantime, I think there in West Bengal there has been one more advanced authority ruling on a similar premise, and there the West Bengal authority, it was the case of a resort where they wanted to take the credit. It was a resort again. A government agency was involved in that project, but the credit was disallowed by the advanced authority ruling on similar parameters. The embassy judgment is also on similar parameters, but I think that is on space on rent. But there the argument was regarding the immovable nature. So this is going to be a difficult arena for claiming the input tax credit. We really need to be cautious on that. We really need to prove that whether the impugned purchases are forming a part of the immovable property or they are not forming a part of the immovable. I think that is going to be the crux of it. We also need to look at the Transfer of Property Act. What is immovable property under the General Clauses Act? I think there are various arguments which need to be considered. And generally, for an immovable property, if it is embedded to the earth, that would be considered to be a part of the immovable property. If it is not embedded to the earth, it would not be considered to be a part of the immovable property. So I think various issues will crop up in claiming credits in case of such goods relating to immovable property. Well, there is one more AR in the case of Maharashtra, in the case of Nipro. That was the case of construction of a factory, a pharmaceutical company, and there also a detailed analysis has been given in that advanced authority ruling regarding which are the civil works, which are the mechanical works, and which are the electrical works, which will be eligible for the input tax credit or not eligible. And if we see the crux of that authority ruling again from Maharashtra, it says that if they are into civil works, the nature of activities by way of civil works, it will not be available. But if it is by way of mechanical works or electrical works, the same would be eligible for input tax credit. We don't have that much time to go into further nitty-gritties of these aspects of credit of input of 17.5 C and D, but I think we need to understand that these ARs and judgments, the way the things are happening, taking credit is not going to be an easy task. Over to you, Maitri.
Pranav sir and
Yeah.
Maitri, we have only 30 minutes, so we have to the
Yeah, that is it. Yeah.
Yes. Now we shall go to the High Court rulings, in which we have covered 3 of the recent rulings. First is the Jharkhand High Court ruling in case of Mahadev Construction Company. This is regarding questioning 2 major aspects. Number 1, whether the garnishee proceedings can be initiated without adjudication, and secondly, whether interest under Section 50 can be determined can be determined without initiating any adjudication process under Section 73 or 74 of the Act. The facts were relying on a flash on the GST portal that the due date for the month of Feb 18 and March 18 is 31st March 2019. The assessee filed their 3B returns beyond the prescribed due date. They got a letter from the department on 8th March 19 demanding interest of 19.59 lakhs on the ground of delayed return filing. The authorities also exercised garnishee proceedings by issuing notice to the petitioner's banker. So the the applicant went out to the Jharkhand High Court stating the answer for these 2 questions. So the judgment which came out was as follows, that the fact that the interest shall be under Section 50 is automatic. However, the quantification of the interest is not automatic without giving an opportunity of being heard to the petitioner in case of any diversion or dispute with respect to the interest computation. The authority agrees that the interest shall be there, but what quantum of interest shall be there upon the assessee, that if there's a dispute in that matter, then it needs to be resolved by way of adjudication process. The question then arises is whether interest recovery can be proceeded under Section 73 or the 74 of the Act, because the wordings in Section 73 have been framed as under that a proper officer shall serve a show cause the proper officer shall serve a show cause notice to the person requiring to pay tax along with interest and penalty where it appears that the tax has not been paid or short paid. So the question then arises is whether interest can be termed as tax not paid or short paid when the fact remains in place that assessee has already paid its tax with the 3B returns. The matter in question only pertains to the interest liability. They have also read the provisions of Section 73(7), which states that the proper officer shall issue notice where the amount actually paid falls short of the amount actually payable. So whether interest can be termed as tax not paid or short paid, the authority has relied on its very own judgment in case of Godavari Commodities Limited, stating that the term tax not paid means any tax which is not paid by the prescribed due date shall be termed as a tax not paid or short paid. Since the assessee filed and paid taxes beyond the prescribed due date of 20th of the succeeding month, they very well fit into the category of tax not paid or short paid, and so the SCN provisions shall apply to this. It needs to be given to the cause whether the interest computation is correct or not. So this was the case, and then lastly they told that no recovery proceedings or the garnishee proceedings can be done without completion of adjudication proceedings under section 73, because till then the amount has not been actually determined as recoverable from the assessee. So this was the ruling, an important ruling which helps the assessees to and the proper officers a correct direction to follow the adjudication procedures first and then move to the recovery proceedings in case of any interest, penalty or the tax which is not paid or delayed or belatedly filed or paid. So this is an important judgment for all the assessees. Next, we move on to the second decision, which is
Maitri,
in
I think
case of
Maitri will just cover up that point of the previous judgment, Mahadev Construction. A good judgment, a favorable judgment for the dealers. We know that in the month of January, February, there were lots of cases wherein notices were being issued for payment of interest by the dealers. This was because of a report from some of the administrative or the revenue administrative officers that there's the outstanding interest of 44,000 crores which is required to be collected by the GST Council, and based on that report, notices were sent to various dealers to pay the interest. One more issue involved was that whether the interest needs to be paid on the gross amount or on the net amount. That is again a matter of dispute and jurisprudence. But as far as this judgment is concerned, I'm not going into the aspects of that judgment, but as far as this judgment is concerned, they said that the SSE has been arguing on the quantum of interest to be payable. The SSE was under a belief, a genuine belief, that the due date for filing of GSTR 3B returns was extended. Actually, it was the case of extension of time limit for non-payment of late fees for returns for the period up to March 18, which was required to be filed by a particular date. That is 31st March 19, and the applicant had already filed the returns and paid the taxes, but the interest was not paid. Hence, the question was that whether without any recovery proceedings, the department, or whether this interest is automatic. There were two issues in this. Since the interest was not paid, the quantum of interest was being disputed by the applicant, and the court has taken note of that because the department was asking for paying interest on the gross value and not on the net value. So that was the quantum of interest itself was disputed. Secondly, the department had also sent a bank attachment notice for collecting that 19 lakh rupees of interest, which again was disputed by the applicant Mahadev Construction Company, and a good judgment which in favor of the SSE, which rightly says that the interest is not automatic in such cases, because where the quantum of tax itself is being disputed by the applicant, unless and until the provisions of section 73 or 74 are not adhered to, the tax cannot be determined, and if the tax cannot be determined, the interest also cannot be determined. Unless that interest is determined, no action can be initiated under for recovery of the interest directly, and hence it is necessary that in such cases show cause notice or the procedures as prescribed under section 73 or 74 should be adhered to by the department, and of course there can be no bank attachment directly. That is a garnishee proceedings cannot happen just otherwise. The due processes of law has to be taken care of. Yeah, Maitri.
Yeah. So now we move on to the next judgment, which is it is in case of Mohit Minerals Private Limited. The Gujarat High Court has went out to state the taxability and the uh, basically a disputed matter in case of the taxability of the ocean freight under reverse charge mechanism. So the questions posed before the authority or the High Court were whether the notional computation mechanism for deriving the freight cost or the value of taxable service in the hands of the importer who is not the service recipient per se is proper. Second, whether the dual taxation on freight cost, that is in customs as well as under RCM under IGST law, be permissible. Third, what is the legislative power to impose a tax on the person other than the recipient? And fourth, what was the validity of the notifications issued under IGST stating that RCM shall be payable on ocean freight by a person, that is an importer, other than the recipient. So these were the questions before the authority, and the High Court ruled in favor of the assessee, stating that the clearly identifying and deliberating upon the meaning of the term recipient under the IGST law, they went out to say that the foreign exporter and the foreign shipping line itself are the recipient and the providers of the services. Importer is merely a person or at whose place the goods are destined to be delivered. In this manner, an importer cannot be for a purpose be termed as a recipient when in law he is not being regarded as the recipient of the ocean freight services. Hence, the power under section 5(3) to tax a person is only upon the recipient and not on any other person. An importer cannot be fitted in the definition of recipient under this section, and thereby these notifications which are issued by exercising the powers under section 5(3) also are termed as ultra vires or unfit basis the decision provided by the authority. So this ruling is basically a favorable ruling. However, there are many rulings or the various writs filed at other high courts as well regarding this ocean freight matter, which I think shall be the matter taken up by the Supreme Court, which shall ultimately decide the true nature and the wiring of the law and provide a foolproof relief for the assessees. This is one of the judgment in favor of the assessee. Over to you, sir.
Yes, I think all of us would be aware that in case of ocean freight, how the liability is being levied. If you try to understand the basic transaction is, say, an Indian importer A is buying goods from USA, and the person at USA is supplying the goods CIF value, that is including cost, insurance, and freight, and the person at USA is hiring a ship from Singapore, making the payment to the shipper at Singapore, the ocean freight he is paying over there, and the goods are being delivered at India. The point is, the person is India is not receiving the services. The ocean freight which is being charged is from a person who is outside India, that is the person in Singapore is charging to the exporter from USA, and the recipient of service is the person at USA and not the person at India. Now, in this scenario, the government has levied this, has tried to levy tax on the ocean freight component by notification number 2, uh, that the recipient of services will be liable to pay tax on ocean freight even in the case if the amount of ocean freight is not known, a deemed formula has been given that ocean freight value will be 10% of the value of the goods which are imported, and on that 5% rate of tax will be levied. So by way of notification, responsibility was cast on the recipient in India of discharging liability under reverse charge mechanism. Now this entire concept was challenged because if we see section 5.3 of the CGST Act, section 5.3 says that RCM will be payable by the recipient of services, and the recipient of services uh, has been defined by way of a separate notification who will be the recipient of services. When we come to this notification of where liability on ocean freight is being charged, therein they have specified that the recipient, the importer in India, will be considered to be the recipient of services, and that is where the powers of this notification have gone beyond the authority of the Act, and a step ahead in the sense that the notification is trying to specify the recipient of the services who in fact is not specified as per the provisions of the Act. And hence, based on this particular consideration, the Gujarat High Court has said that this notification is ultra virus, and tax cannot be levied on such ocean freight by the importer of the goods. I think this is the crux, and as rightly said by Maitri, in other states also, such cases are under litigation. We need to see what judgments would be coming by the other courts, and whether these cases will reach to Supreme Court. I think definitely these cases are going to travel till Supreme Court. The only issue is that whether in the meantime should the importer pay tax on such ocean freight under reverse charge mechanism. Well, again, a call will have to be taken. One of the position could be that where the importer is eligible for the full input tax credit, he can pay RCM and of course get the credit of the same. But in case if the person is dealing into tax-free goods, then yes, it becomes a cost otherwise, and there a conscious call will have to be taken. In case the SSC does not want to pay the tax, I think he should get attached to the court rulings which are happening, so that in case in future if there is a liability, we can say that he is a part of that ruling, and hence not liable to tax. But as of now, this Mohit Minerals judgment is in favor of the SSC. Yeah, Maitri. Over to you, Maitri.
Absolutely, sir. Thank you. Now we shall move to the last ruling, which is in case of Bharti Airtel Limited, a recent case by the Delhi High Court. So in this case, the SSC has went out to ask for two things: whether the rectification under Form 3B shall be allowed in respect of the month in which the error has occurred, and secondly, whether they shall be now eligible for refund of any excess tax paid by them. So the brief facts are presented as under that Bharti Airtel is a petitioner who is engaged in telecommunication services. It has around 50 registration, and it had to adapt to state-wise electronic model of compliances from their centralized model in the service tax to the GST decentralized model. During the period of July to September 17, that is the initial 3 months of introduction of GST, they faced teething issues on the GST network while paying their tax output and the input tax credit computation, which resulted in inadvertent errors and excess tax payment of 923 crores. They went ahead to state that the statutory provisions under the Act envisaged a system-based validation and electronic reconciliation system of GSTR 1, 2, 2A, and 3, and the IT system was trying to adapt to that statutory provisions. However, the government in its own inability to bring about the prescribed statutory scheme, went ahead to give a summary of return in Form 3B, which did not have any validation checks or controls while understanding the tax liability or the ITC or the tax payment. So they want to now rectify their 3B returns for the period of July to September 17, stating that this rectification was already envisaged in the law, which is framed with a system of GSTR 123, which allowed this rectification to be carried out in the month in which the return was filed. So this was the petition put before the High Court, and they went ahead to state that Rule 61(5), which provided for summary Form 3B instead of these forms of 1, 2, and 3, Form 3B and Circular 2626 by 2017, which allowed rectification in the month in which the error was noticed, that is the subsequent month of error occurrence in 3B, shall be ultra vires the CGST Act, and they have also challenged this circular before the High Court. So the ruling and the contentions put forth were as under that this, as I mentioned, that 1 and 2 and 3 was envisaged. However, they did not come up with that scheme, which resulted in this incorrect data being punched. And this revision in 3B is revenue neutral, as they have already realized what was the tax liability. Just they forgot to claim the ITC which they already had. If the 2 and 2A system was in place, I must tell that 2A system was in place from October 18 onwards. So the first 3 months, there was no mechanism by which the supplier could, the recipient could understand what was the ITC claim made by the supplier in their name. So this was the contention placed by them, along with a statement that there was a rectification process of automated interaction and unmatched details in the law provided, and they should be given the refund of the excess tax paid because their output liability as on date has started to decrease. As you all must be aware that the telecommunication sector has been facing a rough patch of lower tariffs along the period, and hence their liability as of now is very less as compared to the tax which they have already paid in July to September 17 period. So they cannot utilize in any manner that accumulated ITC, and hence they went ahead with this petition to file a refund and get the returns rectified for July to September 17. Revenue stated that you are allowed to rectify by virtue of Circular 26, and you should do it by that mechanism only. The High Court, after listening to both the contentions, went ahead to state that when the government failed to fully enforce the statutory provisions which they have framed under the GST Act, they cannot go ahead and refrain the assessee or deprive him to carry out the rectification of the returns pertaining to the period in which the error occurred to reflect the correct ITC. And then the circular also, which department also relied on, and which most of the assessees currently also are relying, the 26 by 26 2017, they went ahead to state that it is not in consonance with the act which is already framed till date, and hence they should be allowed to rectify the return of 3B to the period to which the return relates. So this is a very big relief provided to Bharti Airtel, as to now they can rectify their 3B returns for the first 3 months, get the refund cash paid in their electronic cash ledger, and get the refund of the same by way of section 54 read with the relevant rules under GST mechanism, refund mechanism. This is a very fact and case specific judgment, however, in favor of the assessee. But considering the applicability and the situation as of now, most of our clients have already filed their annual return and audits for the period of 17-18 to get so the applicability of this high court judgment gets a very narrow or restrictive case, but yeah, it's a favorable one for the SSC. Over to you, sir.
A good judgment in these difficult times. Actually, the Delhi High Court has pronounced two judgments on 5th of May, that is just before 4 days. Two judgments. One is this of Bharti Airtel, and the other one was of Reliance Electric Work and the Times of India Group. I think both very favorable judgment, and both judgments given by the same two judges, and both of them have, in both these judgments, they have in very detail analyzed the various technical glitches which have been faced by the dealers right since July 2017 when GST was implemented. Very interesting to note that they mentioned that these technical glitches should not be seen only from the point of view of the department, but technical glitches from the point of view of the dealers should also be seen. Further, they have, in this specific case, they have gone to the extent to state that the circular, which was the circular number 7/7 of 2017, which came on 1st of September 17, had envisaged that the system of that there is a system of rectification under the CGST law. Sections 37, 38, 39 are in place. There is a mechanism that there is a process of filing GSTR 1, then auto-populating 1, then getting 2, then 1A, 2A, then form number 3 was to be filed. All these processes were required to be done for for making any rectification to the processes. And if we understand, all this pertain to the tax period in which the errors or omissions or rectifications were required to be done. But this particular circular number 7 of 2017 was kept in abeyance. And in December 2017, or maybe November 2017, this circular number 26 of 2017 was issued. And the stopgap arrangement of 3B came into play in the meantime. And they said that you cannot revise a 3B return. In case any error or omission or rectification is required to be done, it should be done in the tax period in which the error is noted, or when that error is identified. That say for there's an error for the month of July 2017, but it is noticed in January 2018. Then in January 2018 in 3B you can rectify that error. That is some absurd. That is actually an absurdity. That actually should be the revision should be applicable to the tax period in which the error has occurred. But because of the stopgap arrangement, the various difficulties in implementation on the GSTN portal and the technical glitches of the department in making functional all the forms of GSTR1, the entire set of 1, 2, 2A, 1A, and 3. So in that, the government had failed miserably. There was no other provision available, and this 3B arrangement of rectifying a 3B in the month in which the error was noticed came into place. Now in the specific case of Bharti Airtel, 923 crores had got excess paid during the month of July, August, and September 2017. Bharti Airtel has 50 GST registration numbers, and that error occurred and excess payment was made. Although these errors were rectified in November 2018 and the subsequent liability was adjusted, but that was not sufficient enough to adjust the entire output liability, and hence the plea was made by Bharti Airtel that the ITC should be made refundable, and the provision of filing GST revised return should become applicable to the tax period, and hence the circular number 26, which allows a rectification in the month in which the error is noted, is ultra vires. The act is not in connivance, or rather it is not in connivance with the provisions of the act, and hence it should be read down. and that is what has actually happened in this judgment. The para number 4 of circular 26 of 2017 has been read down by the government, by the High Court, and the petitioner, that is Bharti Airtel Limited, has been allowed to file GSTR 3B returns for the month, file revised GSTR 3B returns for the months of July to September 2017, either online if possible or manually, and that should be taken into consideration. So a judgment which has given an apt benefit. How this will apply to other cases, because there could be numerous situations where revisions of returns might have happened, whether this judgment can be taken cognizance of filing GST revised returns now, or whether again any person who wants to revise should take the help of the court in his case also and say that I should also be allowed to file a revised return, and the system is not accepting, and hence possibly it appears that since the court has allowed filing of a manual GSTR 3B, there could be situations where a manual GSTR 3B return or a physical GSTR 3B return could be filed. I don't know as of now what stand the department authorities are going to take. It is not going to be so easy, but yes, this ruling has come. This ruling has also one more aspect, an important aspect, that in case the SSC wanted to claim refund of the excess tax paid during that period, the provisions of section 54 grant the refund under a very few identified circumstances only, and this particular circumstance in which excess tax was paid by the applicant was not covered under section 52, and that has also been deliberated in this judgment, a very important judgment, and very minutely analyzed all the provisions of the GST law. I think those members who are interested should definitely read this judgment. It's a very good judgment, and I think time will tell that whether physical filing of GSTR 3B returns, how the cognizance of that will be allowed in other cases. We need to check on that. Yes, Maitri.
Yes, absolutely, sir. Thanks a lot. Then next now we have for you all is what are the watch out areas as a GST auditor which we need to keep in mind while conducting the certification under GSTR 9C in the light of the plethora of judgments and high court rulings for various reasons, and what is its applicability to our client's case. So as an auditor, there could be the areas which we need to ponder upon, that is the type of supply, GST rate classification issue, whether solar contracts shall be a works contract service or chargeable to 5% tax rate, HSN classification issue, nature of supply, whether a service, intermediary services, intrastate, interstate supply, credit admissibility, whether the tax shall be allowed in respect to electrical systems, AC fittings, etc. There are various judgments available right now with us, basis the advance rulings and the high courts, which cover various aspects which may or may not be applicable to our clients, since strictly the advance rulings are applicable only to the applicant itself. However, we need to be mindful on the content or the contention derived by the authority while passing those judgments. So the question to the audience here is whether we as auditors need to ascertain the liability of the taxpayer in table 9 of GSTR 9C considering these judgments. We have hereby given the extract from the technical guide of GST audit which the ICAI has given. Please note that this technical guide is being framed by the authors on behalf of the ICAI, and it nowhere represents the views of the ICAI. These are merely authors' view, in which they have given one case that a person has classified EPC contract as supply of goods and has reflected in 5%. However, EPC contracts were treated as works contract services, leviable to GST at 18%. So what should the auditor do? So they have answered to state a view that if the assessee agrees with the contention of the auditor that this should be classified as 18%, then there will be a non-reconciliation and disclosure of additional tax liability and payment thereof as suggested to the tax person, which he may agree to. Second is, if he does not agree to the contention of the auditor, then the technical guide suggests that the auditor should qualify the main certificate under the opinion paragraph that according to him the tax rate shall be 18% and the classification should be a works contract service. So, next is the next example which they have given is that suppose a registered person has wrongly classified his inward supply of GTA as exempt GTA services under notification this, and same has been identified by the auditor. How should he report? They have stated that auditor should first discuss with the registered person. If he agrees that there is an error committed by him, get it resolved and get the additional liability being paid under the recommendation if the same has been short paid. This was the case given by example given. And lastly, broadly what they have stated is sometimes due to the complex nature of the transaction, size of the operations and the type of supply, the auditor is not able to assess each individual transaction leg and identify and comment on every classification of outward and inward supplies. In that, what should the auditor do? So they have stated that you need to take a representation from the management that the information is being declared basis their understanding which they have provided to the auditor, and all the aspects of classification have not been considered. So the question now to the open audience is whether the classification is possible, or whether by suppose you identify certain transactions which are actually being taxable, but however the assessee has not discharged tax. Example, they have availed director sitting fees, they have paid director sitting fees, however they have now not discharged the RCM liability. So do you need to qualify per se? The answer is if the assessee agrees to the actual transaction undertaken, the qualification well is a very debatable thing and a very contentious issue, and we need to really apply professional skepticism before moving on to qualification. More light will be thrown upon by sir. Over to you, sir.
Yeah. Uh, yes, Maitri, I think there is also a question on this aspects that what is the responsibility of GST auditor in case of AR and triple ARs which have been issued. And I think that was the precise purpose why Maitri has taken up this questions that so many ARs and judgments are coming, and whether it is the responsibility of the auditor to take into cognizance and apply this advance authority rulings at the time of the audit. Well, I think we all know that this advance authority rulings are we are getting divergent views in various cases, and these are not final authority of law, and they are applicable to the applicant per se. Yes, if you are auditing the books of a person, or you're doing a GST audit of a person who has applied for such advance authority ruling, yes, definitely you need to take the advance ruling into cognizance for him. But in case of other SSEs, such advance authority rulings only have a persuasive value. The auditor may or may not take that into cognizance. Second, the point which has been put up by Maitri is regarding that the technical guide has given certain suggestions that what approach should the auditor take and how he should quantify. Well, I think I need to add that possibly this technical guide was issued the revised format in May 2019, but thereafter in July 2019 there was a press release which clarified the role of and the responsibility of the auditor. It has stated that the role of the auditor is to reconcile the details of outward supplies and the input tax credit between the annual return and the books of accounts. And that's the role of the auditor. They have not gone to state that the auditor, because if the auditor would go into those aspects, then whether there will be so many transactions relating to place of supply, time of supply, and so many other things. So whether the auditor is required to dwell into all those aspects per se individually or on even on test check basis. Well, I think here a common disclaimer can be given, and reliance placed on such press release should be mentioned by the auditor, that based on this press release and based on the management representation letter, the reconciliation statements have been prepared by the auditor. Of course, we do understand that as practitioners, we are into dual role of auditor, advisor. We also look after their compliances. Some compliance are done by the auditor himself. So as an advisor, and to avoid future litigation, I think the auditor will have to talk with the concerned client, discuss the pros and cons of these various judgments or the outcomes of that, and take a call accordingly. I think that is what will have to be done.
Yes, sir, absolutely.
Yeah. Any other point? I think Charvik has said one or two. I think we have already exceeded the time. We can take up maybe one or two of the questions which have come. Charvik, should I take up?
Yeah, we can take.
Okay. One question is, when two conflicting AIR giving two different views are available, one which is beneficial to the taxpayer is applied, or how it is applied? Please explain. Yeah, I think the same thing. As I told earlier, advance authority rulings are applicable to the applicant directly. To others, they have a persuasive value. And yes, you may choose to follow one advance ruling which may be beneficial to you. But please discuss the pros and cons of this advance rulings with the client, and the risk liability ratio which could be there in future, and the litigation issues. So I think that needs to be discussed with the client, and a call will have to be taken after discussion with the client, what stand he wants to take and what is the risk appetite of the client. And the next is, can you also throw light in case of KPO services where it will be export or as intermediary services? Okay, this question relates to the intermediary services. And in case of a service provider who is a KPO service provider, I think the KPO service providers generally would not qualify as intermediary. They are not arranging or facilitating services for being supplied to some other persons. I think there is a principal to principal relationship in such cases, and prima facie such KPO service providers will not be treated as intermediaries, but we need to check the facts of each case, because what is mentioned in the agreement signed with the foreign principal is of paramount importance, and that needs to be checked. Yeah, Maitri, you wanted to add something?
No.
Okay. There is one more question. What is responsibility of statutory auditor with regards to GST? Because statutory auditors may not well versed with GST laws, regular amendment, charges, changes, circulars, notification, etc. Or other way around, what is the role of statutory auditor as compared to GST auditor with regards to GST? Well, I think as far as the statutory auditor is concerned, the statutory auditor is undertaking the audit based on the books of accounts and under the company law. If the SSC, I think the role of the auditor, of course, statutory auditor, if under the company law, I think the question is trying to distinguish between the statutory auditor doing the company audit and the GST auditor doing the GST audit. The statutory auditor doing the company audit, I think he need not worry about whether all the provisions of GST law have been catered to. He just needs to check the basic fundamentals, as even under the earlier provisions of law, the auditors were checking that whether the excise accounts are telling, the MODVAT accounts are telling, the VAT accounts are telling, the service tax account are telling. Similarly, the GST liabilities as disclosed by the petitioners in his returns and as per the books of accounts, whether they are matching or not. I think that is one area where he needs to check, and there's a provision, but I don't think there will be a liability cast on the statutory auditor per se, especially in this case of differences of interpretation, differences of classification. I don't think the statutory auditor will be liable in any such cases, or it will not be the responsibility of the statutory auditor in such cases. And I think one more question is AR on cross charge. AR on cross charge, I think that it all started with the Columbia Asia Hospitality AR, and it also went to the higher authority, and the triple AR was also issued in that case that cross charge will be applicable. It's a topic by itself, cross charge. If we go through the topic, it will be a long discussion as such. But I think cross charge is here to stay. Wherever applicable, the liability on account of cross charge should be determined, should be discussed with the client. As far as the auditor is concerned, if the cross charge has not been made, maybe the auditor, again taking cue of the press release of July 2017, state that cross charge is he may not take that into cognizance, maybe, and that because the auditor is only relying on the reconciliation, or rather auditor is only responsible for the reconciliation. That could be a stand which is taken, but again this needs to be discussed with the clients, and the conscious decision needs to be taken after due discussion with the clients in such cases.
Yes, I would like to add here is cross charge is a very debatable topic. Cross charge is usually undertaken by various companies in respect to common services which the HO is undertaking on behalf of the different branches located in different states. However, the moot question with the industry now is asking is whether we need to cross charge the employee cost to various states or not. This question had come up recently as well, and the Economic Times publication, if anybody must be aware of, stated that department went off to state that they are not recovering any GST on the CFO or CXO salaries under GST. So they had opened up that issue and closely closed off. However, no concrete discussion or a press release or a clarification or a circular is issued to completely close the issue with respect to a cross charge of employee cost from one location to another.
Right. So the valuation of the cross charge. So question number one is that whether cross charge is to be done or not. The answer seems to be yes, wherever applicable, depending on the facts and circumstances of that SSE, cross charge is applicable. The debatable value, the question is regarding the valuation, that whether employee cost to be taken or not to be taken. I think it's a big debate on that. We don't have that much time. We already exceeded our time limits, but that needs to be taken cognizance of, and needs to be discussed with the client. Well, friends, thank you very much for your patient hearing and inviting us to share our views on this recent advanced rulings and the court rulings. Thank you, Charvik. Thank you, Yogesh Bhai. Thank you, Bhavin. And thanks to Maitri. Very well done, Maitri. Your maiden attempt at Ghatkopar Study Circle. Very well taken. Compliments to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks to all participants.
And thanks to all the participants also.
Yeah, thank you very much, Pranav bhai. Friends, still there are number of complex issues pending with the High Court and the GST committee, waiting to sort out. Pranav bhai, there's a new issue also coming up in the period of the corona, like goods given for the approval unable to return. I think so. This also coming under the issues. Later on, you have to only the take reconciliation of the service prices of the corona. In the period of the corona, there is a cross charge in the period of corona. Lot of issue, I think so, for the period of corona that will wait to come. CA Maitri Mehta and our own speaker, CA Pranav Kapadia, sort out some of the issue on support we can call as a concluded. Thank you, CA Pranav bhai, and thank you all the participants for their become a good listener. Thank you, thank you, Charmik bhai, for giving this opportunity to be a part of the session.
And,
The
by
friends,
the way,
there is
Maitri
a
Mehta is also from Ghatkopar.
okay, yeah. Okay, so there is a few announcement is there. Next meeting is advanced Excel session on Tuesday, and on the Thursday there is a changing times for tax under digital economy by Vishal Mehta. So the all the complete announcement to be made later on. So thank you, Pranav bhai, for giving
Thank you
this
very much.
session. Yeah,
Thank you very much. Stay home, stay safe, everyone.
Yeah,
yes,
thank,
yes.
thank you, the entire
Thanks.
Ghatkopar Study Circle, for giving this wonderful opportunity for taking up this topic. And also to the audiences and the mentor, Pranav Bhai, thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maitri, once again. It was a very good attempt, and congratulations for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll be closing the session. I think all the questions have been taken up.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you all.